Okay, we're on step 3 of making eyes the easy way. This part we're going to actually be filling the irises with polymer clay. I am going to share the recipe for this particular color. You can make this any color you want. Basically, the way that I start is by taking a ball and filling the hole. I'm trying to do this on camera so that it's easy to see. Maybe I should just rest it on the table. And what I want to do is make sure that that clay fills in that hole but also remains convex and in the shape of a bowl. And so, and the way that I get these really nice is that I use the tool to thin it out on the edges so that as the color gradiates out to the edge of the eye, it's thinner. The layer of clay there is thinner. The iris still remains convex, and what you end up having is a wall of clay that reveals the darker color underneath by its transparency, translucency, and thinness. And the way to do that is, I'll show you on the larger size, is that I just basically take the tool after I've placed the bead of clay inside, and I kind of work it up the edge. If you need to scrape any clay off the edge, you can use a tool and just remove clay. If you want to keep a nice line to outline the edge of the iris, you can remove a layer of clay just to leave an edge. But basically that's all this comes down to, is tooling out the clay and making sure that it remains convex and it's thin as it's going up to the edge, and that gives you a nice illusion of a gradiated color that gets lighter towards the center and darker on the edges. Okay, so now I've set the polymer clay into these convex irises, and I've feathered the clay out with a tool to thin it out as it gradiates up to the edge. That part doesn't, it takes some practice to get it right, but there will be detailed pictures of each of these smaller steps in step 3, which is coloring the irises or making the irises. The next step in this process is to add a little bit of Prolix powder to give the irises even more depth. And the way that I do that is this particular color is something that I've mixed. I'll give the recipe for this. You can basically mix these powders to come up with your own colors. This particular one is 4 colors. The primary one is turquoise. I will share the recipe for this, but you can basically mix as many of these colors to come up with your own color needs for this particular part. This is just the highlight of the iris, and the way that that's done is you can actually take this on the lid, off the lid, dip the tip of the tool. Actually, that lid isn't really going to give me that much, so just dip the very tip. And then what I like to do is I like to step 2 of the smaller steps to making the irises. For this particular step, one of the things that I do is, I use Pearl powder. This is a custom color. I'll share the recipe for this. This is 4 colors, but the primary one is turquoise. What I like to do is I dip the stylus tool into the Pearl powder. I remove the excess powder so that it's just a dot on the very tip of the stylus, and I tap that as centered as possible so that it highlights the iris. So I just want to add a dot of this powder at the very center of the iris. And that's basically it. That's all I do for the irises. I guess I do feather that out more, or I embed it into the clay a little so that it gives a shiny effect like this. But that's basically the second step of the smaller steps in step 3, which is making the irises. I do this every time, is I take a cotton swab with alcohol and I'll just clean up any excess Pearl powder that has gone on the edge, over the edge, or even off the edges of the actual clay, so that the Pearl powder stays centered. And then I also press down the Pearl powder so that it's as embedded as possible into the clay. So once again, this allows you to, alcohol, just plain old rubbing alcohol, allows you to clean that up really nicely. And I get this is almost ready to add the pupils. That's pretty much all of this part of step 3. Now we'll begin adding the pupils. Now for the third and final step, the pupils consist of micro beads. These are glass beads that came from Michael's craft store, and what I do for this is I put a bunch in my hand, and I don't know if you can see here that they're all different sizes. For the 1/12 scale, I pick out the smallest ones, like this one right here might work for a 1/12 scale. There's some tiny ones in here, there's some medium ones, and there's some larger ones. But the most important thing is that I try to, on one particular batch of eyes, I try to match all the irises the same size. So I start picking out what I need from a handful like this. For the largest size, I use a metallic set. These are slightly larger. These are about 1 millimeter. What I do is I drop them in, and then I take the stylus and I press it in as centered as possible. I press it in about halfway into the iris. And what I do also is I make sure everything is clean so that none of the sparkly Pearl powder gets on any of these. If I need to color them because they got contaminated with the pearlescent powder, I take a prism marker and I color just the pupil black. I do that before or after baking, but as long as the ink dries before the resin part, because we're going to pour resin into each one of these, and that's the final step. That's step 4. So now for the overview, we're going to take a pupil. This is the batch of 4 that I've been making for this tutorial. Drop a pupil into that. Take the tool, and we're going to set that pupil in, pressing it with the stylus tool. It's easy because the pupil finds its center in that convex structure, and all you have to do is press it into the clay, and you're ready to go. And you'll repeat that process all the way to make sure there's a pupil in every eye. I match up all the pupils before I set them in, pick out 8 matching pupils, and I just set them into the irises. Bake this, and it's ready for the final step. So that is pretty much step 3.